I'm Caroline Bristol, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to Building Resilience in Your Personal and Professional Lives, guided by Dr. Tamar Rodney. I'll start with some logistical details. This session is 45 minutes, with the last 15 minutes reserved for questions. Throughout the session, we encourage you to take notes, interact with each other via chat, and ask questions along the way. I will collect questions from the chat for the question and answer segment. Welcome, ladies. We're still getting more people come in. We'll send out a survey at the end of the session so we can get your feedback. Keep an eye out for that. Today's session will be recorded. Now, I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker. Dr. Tamar Rodney is an assistant professor and mental health nurse practitioner at Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. Her PhD research looked at biomarkers for PTSD in veterans with a traumatic brain injury. She believes the key to beating post-traumatic stress disorder is acting quickly to identify the syndrome and then give science time to catch up. Last year, she was awarded the AMERSA Marianne Marcus Award for outstanding clinical practice, research, policy, and/or education in substance use disorders. Please join me to welcome Dr. Tamar Rodney.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for your warm welcome, and welcome, ladies. I am delighted to have an opportunity to speak with you this morning, and I would love for it to be a conversation, and I truly mean that, so I look forward to your questions in the chat. And for this session, I've been asked to address how do you build resilience in your personal and professional lives. And I'll just be honest that I hate the word resilience because very frequently it's so hard to define, and we take it upon ourselves to say it's a position of weakness going to somewhere that we're stronger. But in my practice, in my professional life, it's something that I deal with every day. And as Caroline shared, some of the individuals I work with are individuals who are recovering from a traumatic brain injury. And one of the things we're trying to do is to get them to a different phase of life to say, this has happened, but we need to recreate a new meaning in life. And in essence, I'm asking them to get to a more resilient place because I often meet them when they're most likely at their lowest. Now, in order to build resilience, one of the things that we have to be very clear about is our health, and not just our physical health, which is often the focus, but our mental health and our mental well-being. And just like to stress that those are two very separate things. But let's just go back to what resilience might mean. Again, why I personally don't like it as a word is because it does ask us to identify yourself as in possibly a state of weakness. What Caroline didn't share with you, but I'm happy to, is to say that I grew up in the Caribbean. One of the things I'm very used to is hurricanes. And in struggling to get to this point of how can I represent resilience in my mind for me to find it acceptable to say, here is something I can look at to say, okay, this represents resilience for me. And I have a very vivid memory of being 10 years old, being in Hurricane Gilbert. And you could Google one of those. It's one of those high category, maybe 5 or whatever it is that's off the scale. And the picture that's everlasting in my mind is that of a coconut tree. And coconuts are something I love, and that wind had that thing going from left to right and maybe doing some circles as well, but it didn't break. It did bend, however, and so years later that coconut tree still stands, but it has a bend in it. And for me, forever, that will mean that is the epitome of resilience. It doesn't mean that you will come back to exactly where you are, neither personally, professionally, or productively, but it means that you can gracefully carry your scars and still maintain a productive, fruitful life, pun intended, because you have gone through, and it's okay to maintain those scars and to wear them proudly. Now that takes me back to this idea of maintaining our mental health in order to build resilience. And mental health in its purest description asks us to recognize our own potential. It also asks us to cope with normal stress, And normal is another of those words that I don't like, but clinically, there is a continuum in which we define things, and we're going for center here. It also asks us to work productively. And fourth, it asks us to make a contribution to our community. Now, there is nowhere in here that it ever lists you should not be depressed or you should not be carrying a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. But when we think of mental health, truthfully, those are some of the first things that comes to mind. How I see resilience, personally and professionally, is really to answer three primary questions. The first one is, what is your worth? The second one is, what is your value? And the third one is, what is your impact? And regardless of where you are in your current phase of life, those three things are the things that I have identified and would love to share with you about calculating for yourself in getting to a pace of resilience and building that up is also calculating what will it be worth to you, what will be the value seen, and what is the impact that you will make. So I'm going to start off this by asking you to answer a poll question for me, and it is to ask you to calculate your worth. So I'm going to ask you to choose one of the four options, and you should be able to see that on your screen now. And I'll just give you less than a minute, so be brave and bold. All right, and another few seconds. And I'm going to share the results with you to say that some of us have calculated our worth in current income, some in potential income, but most of us have calculated our worth in what you have saved or owned. And we do have some even braver souls that say, I do not know. And I will tell you honestly that I would have answered, I do not know, because it's a really difficult question to answer. It's also a question, if spun a different way, means, am I worthy? What am I worth? Do others find me worthy? And so there's different spins on this, but this is asking you to choose out of a bucket of things. Society most often defines us in terms of money, and so income is one of those. Or how do you come to the table to negotiate? That's potential income. Okay, what does it mean realistically right now? And it really means, okay, what am I worth? Is it the money's in my bank account? But the other part that gives us space to grow and is that space of vulnerability is that I actually don't know. I am going to challenge you today to be mindful of this statement. When you have gotten to the place where you learn how much you're worth, you'll stop giving people discounts. And I'll just say that one more time. When you have learned how much you're worth, you will stop giving people discounts. And so you need to decide at what point does your worth means how you calculate it, but it also means what you give to others. It's a process of empowerment to get you to a better space in health. And most of this is an emotional/mental recognition of how much you're worth. Again, we want to take this away from a disease perspective to say it's bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety. Yes, those are part of our mental health, mental disease process, but it extends to way more than that. So consider yourself functioning to recognizing your own potential, coping with normal stress, and working productively. How your contribution is made to your community is valued on how much you decide you're worth, because it decides what you give as discounts, and what you accept. My next question is a little bit more controversial, and so my next question for you is, what is your value? How do you calculate your value? And The reason, before I share that question with you, I'm going to ask you to just think about it briefly. The reason I am asking you this question is that particularly among women, African American women, this is a very touchy topic because historically we've been valued as in a price point. Historically, it remains that we've been sold and adjudged at a certain value. We've also been assessed to be of value to someone else. And that often comes with a number attached to it. So I'm asking you to redefine right now, how do you, not what you're valued, how do you calculate your value? And I'm going to give you another 30 seconds to answer this. And I want you to think about this carefully. How do you calculate your value? And so I'm seeing that you're going much, much faster here. And we're choosing between family, time, assets, and I do not know. And so I'm going to end the poll, giving you 2 more seconds, and I'll share the results with you. And I'll be honest that I'm a little bit surprised at this one, particularly because the literature tells us that one of the ways that women value themselves is around family, particularly around their children. And so we're seeing the lowest rank here is actually 11% valuing your calculation of value as family, with the highest percentage being time. Next, your assets. But we are in the bucket again about I do not know. And I will truthfully tell you that I would be in that bucket of I do not know. Simply because it's such a new question, but it means that if I put a value in myself, will someone judge me as high value or low value? And that's another question that you want to think about for yourself. Am I walking into the boardroom telling them what I am when they thought I was more, or have I just dropped the ball too low? And that sits very long term with you because you're giving other individuals permission to say, yep, that's what you said, and so therefore that's the value I will give you. So I'm asking you to think about this very carefully when we talk about value and your worth, because it's not necessarily down to one component of calculation. It should be more than one. And so I've forced you to choose one, but I'm asking you to think of others. I'll share one brief story with you about this idea of value as time. And it's this, just an everyday run-of-the-mill one, parking. And I thought, okay, should I pay for parking so I can get into the office faster, or should I drive around until I get the parking spot that's on the street? And one of my friends said to me, you know, it's surprising to me that I would even think about the time that I would spend, because it means that I have devalued my time. And I'm like, what? How did time get into value here? And it's for the first time that I thought my time needs to be a little bit more valuable than the parking that I will pay for. And so that's a very lame example, but it asked me to start thinking more strategically about how I give my time value to others, because essentially that's one of the things that I can control. Another quote that I would want you to think about is this: deciding what your value is, meaning that you are not afraid to show up at that table alone. And we often talk about, you know, I want a seat at the table, and if the seat isn't provided at the table, I will bring my chair. But consider this: you know what you bring to the table, so you are not afraid to eat alone. And that's how you calculate the highest value for you. You don't need someone else to bring a table for you or to bring a chair. It means that you have put such a value on yourself that if it needs to be you alone, especially when you're embarking on a new adventure, especially when you're making personal, individual decisions, to say, it is completely okay for me to be the only person at that table. And then again, calculate, how is this value about high or low done? Again, in a historical context, women were often seen as valued with dowries, and like, how much am I worth? Is it 5 cows? Is it 6 cows and a house? What am I asking? What are you actually setting yourself up for? And sadly, this practice still exists. And even to minuscule amounts, that practice still exists. We see being fought in boardrooms about who gets the higher pay. Why should it even be a question now? And why do we still need to prove the value of our time and our expertise, even though you have the same training? Means that there's a different conversation being taken place that someone else is deciding our value, which is why many women will go on their own. Like, I can be my own boss. I can determine what value I put on my time. And it is in this sphere that you find so many more women being entrepreneurs, because one of the things you get to decide is your value and your worth. My third question, I will say, is a matter of convenience that I was forced to answer. Recently, I was applying for national board. I call it acceptance. It's the FAAN application. And one of the questions they keep saying, what is your impact? And I'll be truthful, I was really annoyed with this question because, like, not only you have to do the work, but I have to write in words now. What is my impact? What kind of craziness is this? I've already done the work. It's asking me to spin it. Do I redefine the work I've done, or am I going to go searching to see who I had an impact on? And for that reason, something that in reality took me maybe a day and a half to write, the time I spent pondering and questioning myself and doubting myself of having any impact actually took 2 months. It took me 2 months to get to the space of accepting that maybe the work I've done did have a meaningful impact on someone. So my question for you is to consider not your impact. We all have impacts, and I won't be disrespectful to say what is your impact, but what would you consider your greatest impact to be on? And again, I'll give you about 30 seconds to consider this. All right. All right, so just a few more seconds before we end this poll. And so we're choosing between impact on my family, my job, my role, my friends, and I do not know. And I share the results with you, with 55% of you choosing your greatest impact is on your family, followed by your job or the role you currently occupied, I do not know, and friends. I would like to point out the very obvious here is that your impact on your family might be something you can't even measure. There is a much of an assumption there because you give and you give daily. One of the hardest jobs, I will say, is being a parent, because there's no great reward in it apart from how you feel, apart from doing it as a duty. So it's not like you can see, like, I changed the lives of 15 people because it was a job that you could potentially calculate. Very frequently, we do not get to choose the individuals that are in our family. We do not get to calculate because it is a part of an expected role. And so I'm not surprised that we have mostly chosen our family. What I'm surprised at is friends as the greatest impact. But the I do not know is another place that I would like to go. And it sounds like I'm very indecisive. But I'm indecisive because these are questions that force you to think and also forces you to make changes. And that is what it is. Do I get the time to calculate my impact? Do I actually know who I'm impacting, or am I just going through day to day? And the truth is that well, not many times, but maybe all the time, I'm just going along. I'm just keep going. Yes, I have one task to do and I'll finish this one, and there's a paper to write and there's this research to do. And as long as I finish a task, completion means impact. not necessarily calculating that what that impact is, or, oh, this had an impact factor of 3.2, how wonderful, versus a 5.8. So knowing the individuals you impact, the other question you want to answer for yourself is, does it matter? Should it matter if someone else sees my impact? And so for many of us who are impacted in our family, should it matter that it's calculated? Because impact by reference means that it is something that can be calculated against something else. I'll share with you another statement or multiple statements that I would want you to consider. In building resilience, there are 6 pieces that I would want you to think about. Knowing that individually you are strong, and you're only strong because you know your weakness, and you've been to a place where you've been weak before. Therefore, you have a comparison point. Next, you are beautiful, and you can assess that you're beautiful simply because you're aware of your flaws. You're fearless, and you're fearless because you have learned to recognize the illusion from which you came. You're wise. You're wise because you have been given an opportunity to learn from your mistakes. You love. You love because you know what it feels like to feel hate. And you laugh because you know what sadness feels like. I share these with you because I feel like these are the scars that I spoke about when I think of that coconut tree. That the scars it takes is the bend in the bow, but the scars our human form takes on is the ability to be weak at certain points, to have flaws at certain points, to make mistakes at certain points, to feel hate and to know sadness, but still bearing those because there is a counter position of that, which means that you're strong and beautiful and fearless and wise and can love and can still laugh through all of it. As women, we see ourselves as powerful. We see ourselves as worthy because it's measured by a life fully expressed. I'm asking you at one single time point in your life, which is today. But this calculation needs to be before today and what comes after today. So please know that both your value, worth, and impact will change, and it should change. But it also should give you courage to be your own person, to create whatever this value, worth, and impact is, regardless of what anyone else says, regardless of the income limits that are put on you, regardless of the high-low value that is society has put on us, and regardless of whatever calculation impact has been predefined. If you aren't allowing yourself to be powerful or deserving or worthy, or to enjoy the greater participation that comes with being in this powerful position, then you're allowing other individuals to put you into whatever calculation they're going to put you in. My last quote to share with you is this. I am at a position in maybe 3 or 4 years in my role, 4 years in my role, and I've grown more confident and more resilient, not because anyone taught me to, but because of being brave to make a mistake and to fail and to go again. I empower you to be strong women who are not afraid that your words, your calculation of worth, value, or impact will not be heard or welcomed. I want you to be not afraid just because you have decided that those are what they're going to be. So, strong women are not afraid that their words will not be heard or welcomed. They just speak. And as my grandma would say, let the chips fall where they may. I am going to stop here, and I would welcome any questions, particularly around what I think are fairly potentially controversial questions about asking you to calculate your worth or your value or your impact. So I'm going to invite you to open your microphones or your chat box, and I would love a discussion around how we are calculating ourselves to be more worthy, more valued, and more impactful while building our resilience.